Hey, welcome everyone, and thanks for coming to the inaugural Freedom Not Fear Festival. I'm Sam Kearns, and I'll be your MC for this fine afternoon. We have a great program of speakers lined up for you this afternoon, but first a quick word about why we are here. The Freedom Not Fear Festival is a pushback against the constant pressure by government, law enforcement and corporate interests to erode the rights of citizens and install mass surveillance technologies. The erosion of our rights is usually in the form of passing laws that reduce our right to privacy, due process and the assumption of innocence. The installation of technologies that monitor the daily activities of all citizens, surveillance cameras, internet logging and censorship of communications reinforces to us on a daily basis that we are all under suspicion or should be suspicious of those around us. Freedom Not Fear is a day of conversation and networking, and many groups are represented here today. Open Culture Foundation, Electronic Frontiers Australia, Privacy.io, the Fire Brigade Employees Union, Support Assange and Wikileaks Coalition, Wikileaks Australian Citizens Alliance, and of course the Pirate Party Australia. Today is only the beginning of a long battle against data retention and privacy proposals. And to get that conversation started, I'd like to welcome to the microphone internet activist Matt Watt from the Support Assange and Wikileaks Coalition.
Hi, I'm Matt Watt. I'm representing the Support Assange and Wikileaks Coalition, which is a group of supporters who oppose the political persecution of Julian Assange and attempts to shut down WikiLeaks. We meet regularly to organise actions, spread the word about Assange and WikiLeaks, as well as associated events and people like alleged whistleblower Bradley Manning. Anyone who shares our aims is welcome to join us, and I invite you to visit our table over there. Have a chat with us, buy a badge, and find out what else you can do to support. With new and existing legislation, our rights have been taken away at an increasingly fast rate, which is why we are all here today at Freedom Not Here, part of an international movement to raise awareness of censorship and surveillance, to fight for government transparency, whistleblower and journalist protection, share ideas, tools, techniques like data encryption and online anonymity. It's no coincidence that the key terms I just used are also often used when describing WikiLeaks' organisation. We're talking about basic human rights, freedom of expression, freedom of information, freedom of thought, and many more rights. Since 2006, WikiLeaks is successfully at opening governments. I wish I could list the millions, literally millions of documents that have and still are being currently released by WikiLeaks, or even list the releases of major significance, but we could be here for hours. Instead, I will focus on a select few WikiLeaks releases today. In 2009, WikiLeaks released a secret blacklist of websites the Australian government planned on censoring from the Australian people, a dark insight into the intentions of the government to censor the internet. But what stood out about the list was that half of the sites on the list were not related to child porn, rather included online poker sites, YouTube links, regular gay and straight porn sites, Wikipedia entries, euthanasia sites, religious sites, fetish sites, and in a bizarre twist, two websites, two small Australian businesses, a tour operator and a dentist. Earlier this year, WikiLeaks released spy files, revealing that mass interception of entire populations is not only a reality, it is a new secret industry spanning at least 25 countries and possibly present in Australia. Hundreds of documents from as many as 160 intelligence contractors in mass surveillance industry. Intelligence agencies, military and police are able to silently and en masse secretly intercept calls and take over computers without the help or knowledge of telecommunications providers. Users' physical locations can be tracked if they're carrying a mobile phone. Their microphone can be remotely activated and record conversations. Even if your phone's only on standby. In a world with airstrikes from drones murdering suspects without trials, where is this headed? Another release this year by WikiLeaks and was the Global Intelligence Files. Millions of emails stolen by the anonymous from the private intelligence organisation Stratfor. with close links to the United States authorities, and suggestions of using torture and sexual coercion to get their sources to talk. Among organising a meeting with our now current Foreign Minister Bob Carr, disclosing a sealed indictment for Julian Assange and intimidating techniques used on activists and dissidents throughout the world, the Stratfor emails reveal a close link with a company by the name of Trapwire, owned by the Braxis Corporation and Cubics Corporation. The same Cubics Corporation that does transport ticketing in Queensland. The same Cubics Corporation that does contracts for the Australian Defence Force. Trapwire uses information from surveillance cameras across the world to record and store on a central database in a secret location to be analysed automatically with other intelligence information like facial recognition. Basically, tracking your every move and using algorithms to determine certain behaviours and identify a map of who is friends with who and where will you likely be on Tuesday morning. Western Australian Greens Senator Scott Ludlam questioned the government in the Senate as to whether Trapwire is used in Australia. To my understanding is he gets to receive a response from all of the agencies, and ASIO refuses to answer any questions about anything, but that's another story. When you combine technologies I've previously mentioned with the Australian government's proposal for national security inquiry, cybercrime legislation, signed deals with foreign governments for information sharing, as well as existing powers of ASIO and the Australian Federal Police, a database of every citizen's metadata on emails, browsing history, social media conversations, and a camera on every street post, sounds a lot like the book 1984 written by George Orwell. The main character, Winston Smith, is told, "Don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? Has it ever occurred to you, Winston, that by the year 2050, at very least, not a single human being will be alive that could understand such a conversation as we're having now? The whole climate of the thought will be different. In fact, there'll be no thought as we understand it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness." We're here today to stand up for our freedoms, which brings me to a surprisingly rare ruling by the Southern District New York Court in the United States 2 days ago. Judge Catherine Forrest ruled to permanently stop the use of the controversial National Defence Authorization Act, or NDAA, a group of writers, journalists and activists whose work regularly requires them to engage in writings, speech and associated activities protected by the First Amendment. They have testified credibly to having an actual reasonable fear that their activities will subject them to indefinite military detention pursuant to the NDAA. In summary, we the people won. I should add that within 24 hours of Barack Obama administration announced that they would appeal the decision to scrap the NDAA in the Supreme Court. Judge Forrest gave a 112-page response, which I recommend anyone closely watching Australian national security laws reads. She said, "How about a YouTube video? Where is the line between what governments consider journalistic reporting and propaganda?" She said, "Who will make such determinations? Will there be an office established to read the articles, watch the videos and evaluate speeches in order to make judgments along the spectrum of where support is modest and substantial?" One of the plaintiffs, a journalist and activist, Alexa O'Brien, who was on the Occupy episode of Julian Assange's The World Tomorrow TV show. Alexa had written about the United States cables released by Wikileaks, about the persecution of Julian Assange and court proceedings of Bradley Manning, and many other WikiLeaks-related topics, all of which were referenced in the response. Alexa told the court how she had become aware of WikiLeaks releases, that Stratfor was working with current and former intelligence agents to try and link her involvements with the activist group US Day of Rage, with Islamic fundamentalist movements, with anonymous activists collective, labelling Alexa a cyber terrorist for being associated with Julian Assange, who's also been labelled a cyber terrorist. Julian Assange is currently being held as a pawn in a political move by the UK government threatening to assault the Ecuadorian embassy. The UK government threatening to assault the Ecuadorian embassy, which we have reasonable evidence suggests was under the instruction of the United States government. On behalf of Julian Assange, his father this morning accepted Julian's Aboriginal national passport presented by the Indigenous Social Justice Association. In addition, several sovereign Aboriginal nations are considering giving Julian Assange refuge and sanctuary in their nations. In December 2010, within days of WikiLeaks releasing cable gates, 250,000 cables between United States embassies and the State Department, the Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard called Julian Assange's actions illegal. The former Attorney General Robert McClelland attempted to cancel his passport. ISO alleged that Robert McClelland jumped on the phone to his former ALP co-worker, former Visa employee, and now Vice President of MasterCard, David Masters, to conspire with the United States government in an unprecedented global financial blockade of the Wikileaks organisation, financial censorship. All of this is for someone who hasn't been charged with a single crime, let alone a fair trial. Instead, Julian Assange now faces allegations of sexual misconduct in Sweden, which is offered to answer in the United Kingdom or in Sweden if they simply guarantee that he will not hand him over to the United States. The Australian government refuses to even assist negotiate some basic terms to protect Julian's rights. Julian Assange seeks truth and freedom. They've helped Julian by bringing the truth out and fighting existing and proposed Orwellian laws. As I mentioned, the people have won the victory in the NDAA case. We need to unite, stand together and maintain our freedoms and get back those that have already been taken away from us. We must be able to continue to thrive in freedom, not fear.
Right.
Thank you, Matt Watt. Our next speaker is Dr. Robert Carr, anti-CCTV campaigner from Wollongong University. Please welcome him to the mic, Dr. Robert Carr.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to discuss three things: the misuse of public surveillance, public-owned public surveillance footage by the New South Wales Police, focusing on a case study of Wollongong. And Wollongong, for those who don't know, is about an hour and a half south of here, on the south coast. It's the next major city south of here. The second thing I want to talk about is the policy and legislative changes forthcoming as a result of the work I've been doing in Wollongong with the local council. And thirdly, grassroots approaches to challenging the proliferation of public surveillance at a local level. So why is Wollongong an interesting case study? It has the largest public surveillance system operated by local government in Australia. It has at least 2.5 times the number of cameras than the City of Sydney's council. So on the 18th of February 2011 is where my case study began, and this was the day the New South Wales Police Association, otherwise known as the Police Union, used Wollongong City Council's CCTV footage to publicise the fiction that street violence was escalating out of control in Wollongong. Its Out of Control campaign was launched a month out from the New South Wales state election. The Fairfax newspaper, the Illawarra Mercury, and other media across the state fanned this misperception. The video referred to by the police is approximately 5 minutes in length. It was a compilation of stockpiled CCTV footage that dated from 2008 to 2010. When the police union president, Scott Webber, posted the video on his blog, he said, to quote, "The CCTV footage shows that alcohol-fueled violence in the city is out of control." He said, "This is the footage that politicians don't want you to see." The intent of this video was to shock the public, and taking the police union's word for it, local and statewide media ran with the story. While dates appear in many of the frames of the video, a strong impression was given by all the media that all of these brawls and violent incidences were happening now in the present, even though this is not the case. Channel 10, citing the footage, made remarkable claims like drunken mobs going from one licensed venue to another. Police officers were also victims being confronted by brawling mobs and reportedly outnumbered by thousands of people every weekend on the streets of Wollongong. And we hear this kind of rhetoric in regards to King's Cross as well and other parts of the city here in Sydney. So the video they released was an effective shock tactic because of the way it compressed time. Collapsing 2 years worth of footage into the now, the media did not challenge the actions of the police on this or the merits of their case. By the time these images ended up in the media, they were far removed from their original format. The original 2 years worth of footage had been edited, spliced and sequenced into a 5-minute compilation best of hits from the Gong video. The popular impact was a widespread sense of urgency to deal with an imminent or an immediate danger to public order. So the police drew on this footage in order to bolster their demands for increased policing powers. Scott Webber, the head of the police union, hoped the footage would lead to a fast tracking of a Section 79 application by local police to the New South Wales government. Now, this application would see licensed venues in Wollongong placed under greater restrictions on opening hours and alcohol sales, but more importantly, police would be given more powers to move people on in the streets. So in the Fairfax Press, in the Illawarra Mercury, member for Wollongong, Noreen Hay, was the only candidate running for the seat of Wollongong to question the police union's claim. All the other candidates interviewed by the newspaper supported stronger policing powers. The video produced broad political solidarity, and the police's claims, the police's concerns were endorsed far and wide by all the civic leaders down the coast. The Keneally Labor government, as we know, was decimated by the election result a month or so after, following a major swing in favour of the Barry O'Farrell-led Liberal Party. So the head of the police union claimed the tape was originally part of a Section 79 application made 15 months before in November 2009. This claim is supported by the head of Wollongong Police, Superintendent Kyle Stewart. Evident is there is much more to the story that is yet to be uncovered. Questions remain about why part of the leaked video has footage dating from after November 2009. So there's about 30 or 40 seconds of this video that is taken from February 2010. Other questions yet to be resolved include what does the original tape look like, how much of that footage is same or different added later, and most importantly, who added the footage that was not part of the original application. So these are all questions that remain. But the public still does not know whose hands each segment of the tape passed through before being passed on to a national media publicity corporation called Essential Media Communications. Their offices are here in Sydney. Essential Media uploads the tape the day before the campaign begins, so this isn't an off-the-cuff decision by the police, this is an organised, orchestrated publicity campaign for extra police powers. The company has offices around Australia and has been employed by the police union and the Labor Party and other organisations for previous and subsequent publicity campaigns. So questions remain too about about Scott Webber's claim that the video arrived from a group of, quote, concerned citizens, anonymously. Who are these mysterious concerned citizens with purported links to Essential Media Corporation? Join the dots. The police claimed that releasing the footage was in the interests of Wollongong residents and citizens of New South Wales more broadly. It was a way of pressuring the New South Wales government to act to protect Wollongong residents from a situation that was supposedly spiralling out of control. So this argument hinges on whether New South Wales police are able to show without question the crime was in fact spiralling out of control and getting higher. So what if the statistics said the opposite, that crime in Wollongong was actually under control but decreasing? And here's the onion. New South Wales Bureau of Crime Stats says there was a 30.4% drop in crime for the 4 years in Wollongong in the postcode 2588 area leading up to the release of this tape. I'll say that again, 30.4% drop in crime for the 4 years leading up to the release of this tape. While there's no statistics for the CBD itself, where the cameras and nightclubs in question are, no statistics have been made available by police to confirm their suggestion that crime was spiralling out of control. So in the Fairfax Press, the Mercury did report crime statistics accurately, at least on 7 occasions in the 2 years leading up to this event, but conveniently made the stats absent when the police union's campaign began. Why? Because stats are a crucial piece of evidence to supporting the police union's campaign, but they didn't make an appearance in the Fairfax coverage in the days following the leak. Perhaps these facts were inconvenient for the spin imposed by by the newspaper's editor. Instead, Fairfax encouraged vigilantism. The Mercury's front page said police say our politicians have failed us and new curbs on pubs and clubs must be introduced. This is the newspaper editor speaking. We agree. It's time to fight back, to reclaim our streets, time to reclaim our CBD. The cover page reads, exposed to the world, the worst of Wollongong, shame. The Mercury portrayed a frenzy of community disharmony and a perception reinforced by the inclusion of still shots of the video released by the police on its front page. All the while, violence in Wollongong CBD have been dropping consistently for several years, according to feedback from Wollongong police behind the scenes. Their sentiments and dismay over the leaked footage reaffirmed the drop in crime outload in the postcode statistics from the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Research. Some were even uncomfortable mentioning what happened under the Superintendent's watch. His silence remains firm in regards to this issue. Was police behaviour in this episode conducive to officers of the New South Wales Police Service? Is this a case for the Police Integrity Commission? Remarkably, Kyle Stewart has been filling in as Deputy Commissioner of New South Wales Police. So let's talk about change. Reaffirming is that Wollongong Council, in announcing a motion 3 weeks ago to reform its public surveillance system, is set to extinguish police access to the control room connected to the CCTV network. The new CCTV policy, announced 3 weeks ago, brings Wollongong Council's operating procedures into line with New South Wales operating standards for local governments. And the way Wollongong's been operating its system is the exception rather than the rule in terms of allowing police access to a control room. Even Sydney City Council doesn't let police access to the control room. Perhaps it is because Council has recognised that the law has failed to protect citizens and residents from the misuse of government-owned, i.e. public-owned, this is footage we own, by police for political purposes, in which police set out deliberately to create a moral panic about free citizens being out of control. Council is now writing to the state government, requesting new laws be introduced to protect our privacy from unauthorised distribution from police and judges. So the philosophy behind that changes is as follows, and you've got to imagine you're with a group of friends or colleagues, perhaps making your way home from a club or a bar or a family dinner. You're walking home from town, and just as you walk past a pub, an altercation breaks out. You were caught up in the commotion by purely being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Your reaction is to protect yourself and perhaps defend your friends and family. The next day, your image has been uploaded to the internet. The footage has been edited so the start of the incident is missing. Instead of being viewed as an act of self-defence, your family and friends now see you as a drunken brawler. You are shamed by the footage. Then the reality sinks in. There is nothing you can do about this. It is too late to stop the footage being circulated. It's on the internet and the damage is already done. And this 5-minute video I was talking about before now has more than 19,000 hits on the YouTube account it was uploaded to, with people from all over the world calling for retribution against these people who were caught fighting on that video footage. So 3 weeks ago, the councillors in Wollongong voted to seek a major overhaul of the governance of CCTV in New South Wales. The changes would be in the interests of protecting the civil liberties of the community. Ideally, the new laws, if taken up by the state government, will have a ripple effect, impacting local councils across the state. The changes will have statewide consequences. The new laws are expected to redress police exemptions from current privacy laws, from the Privacy and Personal Information Act, New South Wales 1998, also known as PIPA. Section 27 of the PIPA says this: New South Wales Police are not required to comply with the information protection principles. In other words, police are excluded from this particular act from any repercussions from their misuse of footage, from leaking it to the media unauthorised. Basically, this means too, police can do whatever they want with your image without repercussions. If the footage was captured on local government CCTV, they can do whatever they want with your footage. So a new concept's being introduced in the new draft code of practice that I've been involved in drafting with the council. One that will see council take a more proactive approach in protecting the civil liberties of members of the public. And this concept, and I've written about this in my blog, is called false association. It was a term I first used at a paper at the Uni of Wollongong in February 2012. The people depicted in and affected by the leak of Wollongong CCTV footage by the police are victims of false association. So my argument is that Wollongong Council and the New South Wales Government have a moral obligation to protect residents against false association, which basically means from being unfairly misrepresented and stereotyped by the police, and especially without their consent. Because current New South Wales privacy laws exempt police from penalties normally associated with misusing public surveillance footage owned by local government, false association is as much a legislative issue as it is an ethical one, and is of great relevance to the community. The issue is an important one for civil liberties, and the questions are thus, how can citizens be made to feel so unprotected from the law because of the actions of New South Wales police? How is it that citizens can be made to feel unwelcome in their own public space, day or night, because of the ongoing risks of leaked surveillance footage? New legislation is required in New South Wales for CCTV. Now, just to finish off, I wanted to touch on some grassroots ideas for resistances to the proliferation of public surveillance technology. So while many of the campaigns by organisations like Wikileaks or others may seek to undertake a top-down approach to resisting the spread of public surveillance technology, my success, well, so far, in lobbying local council reveals possibilities to create change from the bottom up, with grassroots pressure. So while taking local government head-on with CCTV operating procedures, etc., has thus far been somewhat successful, there are other methods grassroots activists can take to chip away at the inclination of the powerful to proliferate surveillance technologies and to shift power back to the hands of the many rather than the few. One is the backlog approach. It's a method that involves the clogging up of the surveillance regime through legal and legitimate means. It took one security provider, for example, a whole 2 days of work just to find a couple of minutes of footage of me. I requested the footage under what's called the Government Information and Public Access Act. Used to be known as Freedom of Information Act, but in 2009 it became the new act, also known as GIPA, G-I-P-A. So imagine then if you had a mass request for footage by members of the public, you could tie up the resources of the public surveillance regime for months, if not years. Second, there's also the option of taking a more artistic approach, of subverting control of the lens by inverting the ownership of the images captured on the public surveillance footage. Using footage requested through Freedom of Information, why not make video clips or viral videos which represent the public in ways other than that presented by the authorities that own the footage, thereby creating windows for changing public perceptions of why and how CCTV is used and how it can be used. So demonstrated examples of this include video sniffing, in which you can pick up CCTV streaming footage via a wireless receiver. Then there is also the UK film by Manu Lukes called Faceless, where the entire film is made from legally acquired CCTV footage, much in the way I'm suggesting. Thirdly, there is what I like to call the show me the money approach, show me the money, which is probably a good one for those concerned about public surveillance but are less inclined to take up the activist cause directly. That is, what I mean by show me the money is ask your local council one simple question: prove it. Prove it. Show me that CCTV does what it says you do, that it reduces crime. Remarkably, Wollongong Council does not collect statistics on its CCTV system, therefore cannot prove it reduces crime. Furthermore, Nowra or Shellhaven Council, which is further down the coast, their stats show crime actually increased in the areas where the cameras are after the cameras were put up. Which leads me to my final point. I wrote on my blog a few months ago that it is time for a national inquiry into taxpayer expenditure on CCTV. In 2007, the Howard government handed over millions of dollars to local councils all around Australia to erect public surveillance systems as a crime prevention measure. The program was actually called the National Crime Prevention Scheme. Globally, there are virtually no studies around the world that show CCTV reduces crime. Studies show the greatest impact CCTV is to create friction and disharmony between different social groups, particularly young people and minorities. At most, public surveillance has had a noted impact on car thefts, and this is in one study from the US. In October 2011, the federal government's own research institute, the Institute for Criminology, discussed the latest figures and research available. It said, this is the federal government's own department, it said CCTV has had a modest impact on crime reduction at best. A modest impact on crime reduction at best. And this is also in line with international studies that have been done internationally and locally. So anyone thinking about running for federal government in the next election could consider campaigning on the establishment of a federal inquiry into the wastage of taxpayers' money on a false technology. If CCTV does not reduce crime, then why is the public paying so much for it? Thank you.
Thank you. It's Dr. Robert Carr. Our next speaker is going to be... Yep, it's you. And I've just drawn a complete blank. David Campbell from the Pirate Party Australia. Take it away, David.
Good afternoon, Sydney. My name is David W. Campbell and I am President of Pirate Party Australia. Now, Pirate Party is a very provocative name, I know, and it conjures up images of Caribbean outlaws with marvellous hats, poor hygiene, and the usual boating acronyms. But then there's the other pirate, the digital one, the fan that ignores the copyright monopoly. The label pirate has been given to those who share culture and knowledge for free in private. This label was used by the middlemen, who felt that their profits were slipping away as what they provide is no longer required. It has continued to be used by those too complacent to adapt as a derogatory term to shame us, to make us afraid, to throw us in with thieves. We have claimed that title for ourselves. Yes, we are pirates. Yes, we share music and movies and books and information and knowledge. As a global society, we are so well connected through the internet, crossing borders of nations and the vast geography of our world, that free distribution of culture and knowledge has become the societal norm. So what does sharing music have to do with civil rights and freedom? That part is not immediately apparent to the layman. Instead of innovating within this new instantaneously globally connected marketplace, the intellectual property industries choose to lobby governments of the world to interfere with our rights and remove our freedoms. The lobbying is a fear-driven, last-ditch effort carried out in the name of saving the bloated profits of their no longer sustainable business. The business of monopolised local distribution of cultural works. The zoning of these works with altered value depending on where you live, along with arbitrary delays to increase demand. This is where Pirate Party as a movement began. A voice speaking out against cultural oppression, highlighting the ever-growing laws that are restricting our freedoms and perverting our privacy. But the protection of civil rights and the pushback against the middleman has grown into a far more robust movement. Around the world, there are increasingly abominable legislative changes being pushed forward to protect profits and, of course, the ever-looming fear of bad guys. As Pirate Party Australia formed and began to grow, we realised that this was not just a problem for a few nerds on the fringe. And it wasn't just music and movies. It was and is human rights. The right to privacy from arbitrary surveillance. The right to freedom of assembly. The right to assumed innocence. The right to freedom of association. And the right to freedom from censorship. In our world where the words politician and government can so often mean incompetence, corruption, lies, and secrecy, perhaps pirate, rather ironically, can stand for transparency, honesty, protection of rights, trust, not surveillance, the death of censorship, protection of democratic government, and freedom, not fear. As we commemorate the 11th anniversary of the tragic September 11 attacks, we also reflect on the climate of fear that has been exploited and has allowed governments, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies to pass controversial, unnecessary, and unbalanced laws that erode privacy and other fundamental freedoms. Our right to privacy perverted, our access to data scrutinised, and our communications and content under the constant threat of censorship. Our fundamental human rights are under attack, but not by terrorists or dictators, We and our representatives are giving the right away willingly. Our rights are being attacked by our fears. I truly wish that this was a conspiracy theorist's fever dream, but the governing powers of this nation appear to be reading George Orwell's 1984 as an instruction manual for the future of our society. The novel that gave us the expression Big Brother, that describes a censored culture, a society controlled by fear, taught to be intolerant of all others, and constantly at war. Was it a prediction of our society? A few short years ago, Australia was rocked by plans to censor our internet. It was claimed to be in the interest of protecting the children and stopping the bad guys. Realistically, it was a poorly thought out plan to filter out any information deemed illegal. However, lumped in with illegal content was also anything that had been refused classification for retail sale in Australia, and anything that had been deemed inappropriate for a reasonable person by an unelected classification board. The vagueness of this plot, coupled by its ability to be easily circumvented by school children who have grown up with internet filtration at their educational institutions, made this system not only useless for child safety, but also highlighted for us its true purpose. A system like this, which checks all web requests for access permission, requires a central point of processing for those requests. Regardless of something being on a list, your request for that page would be logged by software for at a minimum the time it takes to process that request, and it would be child's play to simply extend the logging period. It also puts in place a system which could be easily manipulated by future regimes for political censorship. We called it for what it was. It was an encroachment of privacy and a push towards draconian censorship. This plan was rejected by the citizens of this country. The government was told where to stick it. Unfortunately, they just put it on the back burner. Fast forward to today. The snooping agenda is no longer hidden under the guise of a filter to protect the children. Instead, there are vague press releases, parliamentary inquiries, and whispered statements from departments of our government and their staff discussing plans to just install an arbitrary data retention system, something to steam open all of your mail, scan it, reseal it, and send it on its way. With the recent push towards cloud storage, this system would collect any and all communication online, suddenly starts to collect information like private letters to your loved ones, internet banking activities, online shopping, business communications and documents, family photos, whatever you are watching, whatever you are reading, whatever you are listening to, and whoever you are talking to. All kept on a file with your name on it, held on a server in the hands of a private company for 2 years, just in case you happen to be a murderer, child abuser, terrorist, fraudster, or pirate. This is not the treatment of a law-abiding citizen. This is the warrantless treatment of a wiretapped criminal suspect. Along with the warrantless wiretapping of every citizen in the People's Police State of Australia, comes the chilling effect on the communications of a nation living in fear. It happened in Germany when this was attempted. People avoided talking about politics for fear of being targeted. In the long term, this leads to more oppressive laws slowly creeping in, as suddenly there is no free voice questioning the people's involvement. Scan the retained data for keywords? Sure. Run psychological profiling software on every citizen looking for pre-crime behaviour? Why not? Then we have the issue of whistleblowers and journalist sources being tracked and recorded. With the further suppression of communication under government control, corruption is free to run rampant without fear of exposure because everyone is too scared to talk about it. Their communication recorded and scanned for keywords. We can see what America does with whistleblowers and journalist sources when they are exposed. Of course, these plans for data retention are all vague in detail, either intentionally or due to the technical incompetence of the pen holder. There's very little information on what kind of data is to be scanned and kept. There are mixed responses, none of which match the proposal nor the technical definitions. The saddest part of all is that the National Security Inquiry proposals are merely extending an amended bill of similar imprecision that has already passed through our Senate. The Cybercrime Amendment Bill allows for this data to be stored privately for up to 6 months. There is at least some consolation with this bill, however, as it requires a request is made by some law enforcement before they start recording. And it's only viewable if a warrant's granted to view the data. Nevertheless, this obviously presents a high-value target. It is already a reality in Australia. Just think about it. The retaining of your data for 6 months on request from police has already been approved by the Senate. The Federal Attorney General, Nicola Roxon, recently spoke of the need for balance between ensuring law enforcement have the right investigative tools required to protect the community and the need to maintain individual privacy. She also spoke about the fact that government staff can easily be confused, exploited, or corrupted into providing access to systems via clever social engineering. We have seen how well the government can protect these systems, with the internet filter list leaking almost instantaneously as if it was held securely by the government within a kitchen colander. At this point, she felt that the case still had to be made for data retention, and we could breathe a short sigh of relief with the knowledge that she was not convinced. To a potential hacker or identity thief, a retention system itself is a treasure trove of information, a high-value target. Considering that it will be kept in the hands of private telecommunications employees, the very same risk Roxon eloquently describes as a problem within government agencies presents an even greater risk for privately owned systems. In a sudden backflip, however, Ms. Roxon has come out in support of a 2-year data retention plan, but not just on request. She wants to record everyone for 2 years. The wish list exposed in the National Security Inquiry shows that this is only the tip of the iceberg. The government wants agencies to have permission to hack computers nearby to one from which a potential crime may have been committed. They want to be able to plant software and other data on them, and for ASIO to be given a free pass when it comes to computer networks in Australia. How can she envision setting up a system for data retention, knowing these systems can be and are being subverted? Proponents of data retention suggest that you have nothing to fear from privacy invasion if you are not a criminal. To these people I say, take off your pants and hand me your wallets. If you have nothing to hide in your pants and you are happy for all of your private data to be recorded by a private company to be used by the government later, this should not be a troubling request. Those with little understanding of how these systems operate argue that only the metadata would be recorded. So they'll only record who, where, and when you communicated, but not what you said. The reality of communication on the internet is that the vast majority of email and private messaging is carried out via web and/or cloud services, and there is no way to separate the metadata from the message. All data sent to this service from a private computer is encapsulated in the same way and sent to the service, with no markers indicating whether it's meta or other. If metadata is needed, then the entire data session needs to be recorded. If a fraction of missing data is present, it renders the whole worthless. Any information that's collected by this system has the high possibility of being encrypted by the end user, especially private documents and business communications, rendering the collected information useless. But that's okay. Extra legislative changes have gone hand in hand with the snooping, changes that go against current rights. The right to avoid self-incrimination has been thrown out of the window. Fines and even jail are suggested for refusing to decrypt data. Could you remember a password used 2 years ago to send a document to a business partner? Can you tell me your password from 2 weeks ago? How many of you have had to reset their passwords in the last few days because you forgot it? Nicola Big Sister Roxon describes the mandatory data surveillance and retention system as intending to ensure that vital investigative tools are not lost, essentially implying that today's tools are sufficient. She invokes the murder of Cabramatta MP John Newman in 1994, a murder case that was successfully resolved using decades-old laws and investigative tools applied to modern technology. She says that without the extra legislation of recording everyone's online activities through data retention, like no other democratic society ever has, the capability to use the legislation and proven tools that we already have will somehow be lost. I find this to be an appalling threat to privacy. In fact, I find it to be a complete perversion of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, to which Australia was an instrumental founder. In Article 12 of this declaration, which is stated quite plainly, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, home, family, or correspondence. Data retention and censorship both violate this right, this fundamental right, this right without which democracy cannot exist. For democracy demands freedom, freedom from arbitrary surveillance, freedom from censorship, freedom of association, and above all, freedom, not fear.
Thank you very much, David Campbell from the Pirate Party, President of the Pirate Party, in fact. Now, our next speaker is an internet activist, Dan Jones, who's going to come and talk to us about data retention and forced decryption. Let's hear it for Dan.
Hey guys, yeah, it's a really good crowd, and yeah, it's a bit small, but like as Margaret Mead said, it's only ever been a small group of people to change the world. Like, never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. Yeah, so I find like this right now there's a lot of talk about the latest the plans for data retention in Australia, but I myself once had an incident with physical surveillance where they do human monitoring, etc. I was asked to be an informant for an intelligence group, and they offered to pay me money in order to like help them, feed them information on the anti-war movement, which was like and you know, I have no criminal history. I have no convictions, and yeah, so this, yeah, I mean, the government does actually, that was a bit of a revelation to me. But I actually don't mind Nicola Roxon, because her arguments are quite easy to dismantle. She'd recently posted a video up on YouTube in response to a lot of the voices that people here were raising on the web, and a lot of the obviously she's feeling the pinch from our opposition to the national security inquiry and the data retention proposals and the forced decryption laws. But to quote Nicola Roxon, GetUp's claims that we store the contents of every site that you visit is false. We only store the metadata and not the content. But metadata is precisely what intelligence agencies have always wanted to collect. Metadata is what sites you visit. She's very careful with her language. She says that they will not store the contents of the sites that you visit, but they will store the fact that you visited Google, and because Google puts the search string in the URL, they'll store the fact that you searched for this at this time. So this data is a profile of all of the things that you are interested in over time. But you've got to watch the language that she uses. She'll be talking about content, but metadata is in aggregate a profile of your interests and who you communicate with. If I send an email to a friend, and I send that, and we're sending emails regularly, the fact that there are many emails from me to that friend know that we are a strong connection. And if these connections are activists, you know, planning against, you know, the latest piece of government legislation, you know, this can be used by the intelligence agencies to like, you know, stifle dissent. And don't think they won't stifle dissent. I've had experience to this myself when I was asked to be an informant for an intelligence group in return for pay, in order to give them money on the give them information on the anti-war movement, which is something that's not really talked about, because obviously when the government talks about it, it's always about terrorism, it's about child porn, it's about pirates, it's about criminals. But the law is blind. It applies equally to everybody. And if they're retaining this data, it will be retained on everybody. Nicola Roxon also says that we live in a changing world where technology is ever evolving. We no longer have to use the phone and the fax machine to communicate. Even, in fact, right now I'm communicating to you over the medium of YouTube. But criminals and terrorists have also got these benefits. So criminals and terrorists have these benefits, but so do the law enforcement and in the intelligence agencies. It's like technology. Her argument is technology is changing, so we need new laws. No, technology is changing, so technology is changing. So the police have more powers too, because they have, you know, better computers, because they have access to this. Like the idea that because technology changes, we need new laws is a fallacy, and it should be attacked. The other thing that Nicola Roxon said in that video was that when the Howard government tried to change national security legislation, it was done behind closed doors. As if to imply that perhaps her government wasn't also doing it behind closed doors. And we know that there are secret submissions to the National Security Inquiry because the politicians have been referring to them in their discussions. And it's kind of disturbing, the idea that something which is going to institute data retention of all of your web browsing history for 2 years on every Australian is going to happen behind with information that the public were not even privy to. And so obviously there are politicians who receive these briefings from the intelligence agencies, and I'd really like to encourage them to table those briefings in Parliament and be protected by parliamentary privilege, so the public can know on what basis the legislation that concerns us is being passed, like what reasons it's being passed. Yeah, and the other thing which I find particularly disturbing about this is that they want to make an offence out of failure to failure to assist in the decryption of communications. Now, one might think that one would have to communicate in order to be privy to this particular offence, and be subject to this offence. But in fact, with the contemporary infrastructure of how people use their computers, I can store something in Dropbox, which is just for my personal reading. I could say write a diary to myself. So I might write in this diary my thoughts about, you know, anarchism and overthrowing the government and, you know, a whole bunch of different, you know, crazy things, because human imagination is possible. It has the most crazy possibilities. And I wouldn't want anyone to read this. This is my thoughts to myself. But if I put this on Dropbox, what I've done is I've just communicated that to a server over in, you know, California or in Europe or something. And in that very act of communicating, of writing thoughts to myself on a piece of paper, I've communicated, because that's how the cloud is structured. That's like the way that the contemporary web works. And so there's no longer this distinction between there's less and less a distinction between communication and keeping and writing to oneself in the way that we use computers in our daily life. And so if you make a crime out of failure to assist in the decryption of communications, you can make a crime out of somebody keeping their thoughts to themselves. And there's a word for this. The word is thought crime. And the National Security Inquiry is proposing to institute thought crime. As soon as it's impossible to keep one's thoughts to oneself without penalty of jail, you punish somebody for keeping thoughts to themselves. So that's like people to think about that. And obviously Nicola Roxon is feeling the pinch on this, otherwise she wouldn't have responded in this way. And I'd like her to keep responding because it's kind of amusing. I mean, give us what you've got. I mean, it's not, we're not collecting data on all your web browsing history. No, we're not collecting the content of your web browsing history, we're just collecting the metadata from your web browsing history, which is of course every website that you visited. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And I hope she'll keep talking. I hope Nicola Roxon would make another video because I'd like to also demolish the next arguments that she puts up. And yeah, all right, thanks guys.
Thank you very much, Dan Jones, internet activist. And our final speaker for this afternoon is Simon Frew from the Pirate Party. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you. All right, there have been many changes to national security legislation since the attacks of September 11, 2001. Every year, both major parties have proposed more draconian security laws, which have been passed without discussion and with bipartisan support. The current National Security Review has been the first time the wider public have had the opportunity to comment, and comment we did, with literally hundreds of submissions. I'm going to go through the proposals not already covered by David and Dan. The government claims that motivation behind these changes are to modernise and streamline the Australian security laws. Considering the laws have been updated more regularly than every time since 2001, it's hard to see how this is true. There is no evidence of any increased crime since 2001. In fact, there's been a marked decline. Part of the justification for increased surveillance powers have been the changing expectations of privacy in society. The government uses the logic that because people share more of their personal information on social media, they don't care so much about their privacy anymore. Just because we share more info about what we do online, we do choose to voluntarily share that information with our friends. According to a study on Facebook, only 1/3 of Facebook users expect what's published on Facebook to be considered public. The other 2/3 of Facebook users consider everything they publish on Facebook private. This means that 2/3 still have an expectation of privacy, whether that's a reasonable expectation or not. Before there was a social media, it was actually impossible to share in the way that people do on Facebook, except through one-on-one or face-to-face basis. The idea that this means everyone's okay with being monitored is a massive stretch, one that is being pushed by ASIO in a power grab by Australian intelligence services, backed by media and defence companies. The way the government is acting, you'd think they were elected by spies rather than the Australian people. The National Security Inquiry discussion paper claims that Australians' privacy must continue to be protected, yet most of the proposals are designed specifically to weaken the already weak protections we have. Proposals are broken down into proposals the government are advocating, proposals the government wish to advance, and proposals they are expressly seeking an opinion of the committee, or how I interpret it, what they expect to pass, what they want to pass, and what the security services hope they pass. Part of the difficulty in replying to the inquiry terms was just how poorly worded the entire terms of reference and discussion paper was. It was quite difficult to know what some of the proposals actually meant. For example, the data retention proposal that David already spoke about, it was not explained in any detail. The only safe way to respond to the inquiry was to assume the worst of every single proposal they put forward, as there was no way to know what the government actually wanted in most cases. Okay, now I'm going to run through a list of some of the worst proposals that they put up in the National Security Inquiry. They'd like to reduce the minimum sentence from 7 years to either 1 or 3, depending on how you read it, before surveillance can be deployed against Australian citizens. This will lead to surveillance being deployed on a much greater basis than it currently is. One of the better proposals was to reduce the number of agencies able to conduct surveillance. The issue with this, however, is that every single agency who had surveillance powers previously will still be able to access that information through one of the 4 agencies with approval. They'd like to streamline the warrant information to include more information about the nature of surveillance to actually help to make sure that our privacy is not being unnecessarily breached. But they do this whilst removing administrative information designed to make sure that surveillance is not being used for corrupt activity. More information about the nature of surveillance is a good thing. That said, security services are no less corrupt than they were in the past, so procedures to limit corruption are still needed. Being from Wollongong, I found this laughable, when they were trying to argue there's less concern about corruption in society. 2 local councils in Wollongong were both sacked in 2008 for dizzying amounts of corruption. Given the sweeping amount of powers, the Attorney General wants to extend warrants to be able to vary or extend the length from 90 days as currently to 6 months without judicial oversight. This could be used to harass political opponents, weaken the rule of law, and in general, the weakening of judicial oversight was a constant theme throughout the inquiry, which we responded to by consistently demanding judicial oversight be put in place. The second level of proposals where the government aren't pushing as hard include creating a single communications intercept warrant so that all forms of surveillance can be deployed against anyone with a surveillance warrant placed on them. Industry interception obligations where they push the costs of surveillance onto ISPs. And they'd like to extend the regulatory regime to include other internet companies like social media. The named person warrant allowing people to investigate individuals regardless of where they are. They'd like to grant ASIO the power to modify target computers in the execution of a warrant. It wasn't clear what this actually meant. Minimally, it could just mean the installation of a monitoring program
Do you want to just let them know what's going on?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm just going to try and get a little bit of footage of it, but there's a riot heading this way. Yeah. We've got a large amount of police, so we can see the riot squad and the police have just arrived. And we can see down the bottom here there's a large crowd forming with various banners. So the police have asked advised everyone to move. They said they're not forcing everyone to move, but they've advised people to move along. So I'm just going to go up a little bit closer. You can see quite a few people have stopped now. They were making a lot of noise as they walked along. So we've just wrapped up the speeches there that were happening. And I'm just going to get a little bit closer to see if we can get some footage. So as we can see here, it's quite clear that these are definitely related to the riots in the Arab world and North Africa. So we've got various signs about Muhammad here and various other signs up. So we can see a lot of police officers are forming around the group. We've got the riot squad now moving in a little bit closer. We're staying back, but they've come in from the city here. So
what this brother is saying, but where we are right now, we have to take a different approach, and this is the right approach. The approach of Muhammad sallallahu. Listen, we are upholding the munkar of Muhammad sallallahu. What they did against him, we are all aware of that, and we all acknowledge it. All of us, we all love Muhammad sallallahu. True or not? Each and every one of us here love Rasulullah sallallahu. But if we're going to show Allah that we want to do our acts of worship according to what pleases Him, who does Allah love the most?